The easiest way to analyze a story is to analyze its characters. Characters should be a retranscription of the story's themes through their identities, through their origins, through their names, through their goals, through everything that makes them individuals. Now, the identity part of a character is twofold. There's an individual section and a collective section, and the character is nourished by both of these sections. It's part an individual, something comes from the inside, it's part a collective, something comes from the outside. Now, the identity of the character is often defined by her name, and her name comes from the collective, from the expectation of the collective, namely her family. Her identity is also defined by her origins, and you see that origins here is placed between identity and name, because before the character is born, before the character is granted a name, she already has origins. She already has a predefined predefined array of needs and wants. And these needs, these wants, will define most often her goal and her purpose in life, much like her name did in the identity factor. So the goal of the character will be defined by both her origins, so needs and wants, it's from the inside, and her name and expectation, that's from the outside. So individual, collective, turns to the goal, and the goal now will define you one of the four main themes of the story. Characters are the core of your story. If you're analyzing any story, your own story or someone else's, you have to analyze the characters first. Now, why are they core? If you fail, if your characters fail, your story fails. Now, why is that? Because there are three factors when it comes to character creation, and one of them is prevalent when it comes to establishing an authenticity factor, a believability factor, and that's the weaknesses. The weaknesses create a relatability between the characters and the public. They will be the first thing that allow to create an attachment, a familiarity, a relationship between them and the public. So, missing the weakness part, the failure part, the scar of the characters is missing the whole character creation process, and therefore missing the story. Now, relatability is not the only factor you want to consider when it comes to character creation. You also want to create a likability factor, and that goes through the character's strengths. When you're analyzing the story, you want to look for strengths. You want to look for strengths, but not too deeply. The strengths should be obvious, because the strengths will be displayed by the character. They will be obvious because they're a factor of desirability, of attraction from the character. So you should be able to see the strengths first and foremost. Then, later you'll see the weaknesses, because the weaknesses are often hidden, much like many individuals hide their weaknesses. Same thing for the characters. So, you show the strengths, because we want to be attractive, and you hide the weaknesses because we don't want to look vulnerable. No, characters are very individual. If you want to create that believability factor, you want to make them act like persons. And finally, you let some time unfold to create a memorability factor, and that's through quirks. Quirks, maybe hairstyle, silhouette, body type, phrases, expression, or signature words and accessories. Now, to summarize, if you want to analyze any character, you have to look for the likability factor, the strengths, that shouldn't be too hard. The relatability factor, the weaknesses, that's harder, but that's the most important. And finally, the memorability factor, the quirks. That's just as hard as the strengths most of the time, because the quirks are really visible. The final part of character analysis is analyzing the interactions between the characters. Now, in most stories, you'll have up to 4 main characters, because the scale doesn't allow much more characters, really. And you'll have a rival type, an enticer type, an advisor type, an arbiter type. And in the middle of these 4 characters, these 4 main characters, there's you. Wherever you are, the writer or the reader, you have a relationship. You will have interaction, and you can imagine this interaction, with these 4 characters. Now, what do you want these interactions to be? Do you want them, or can you consider them to be friendly? Do you want to establish a relationship with these 4 characters regarding their 4 behavioral profile? Can you make use of the help they could bring to you, or how could you help them? This is all about change. Your story is rhythm by crises and conflict, so it's all about character evolution here. How can you help the character and how can they help you? And finally, what will you remember? That's the most important part. So there's a quick parallel to make with the previous section. As you can see here, the likability part is directly linked with the friendly part. So it's the part strength, likability, attraction, likelihood. The relatability part is linked to the health part, so it's the growth part, the support part, the benevolence part, the empathy part. And finally, the quirks part, the memorability part, is directly linked to what you will remember of the character. So what makes them unique, because that's what perks and quirks are. They're what makes your character unique at the moment they're introduced and at the moment they quit the story. So these three parts are directly linked to the likability factor, the relatability factor, and the memorability factor. And these are the three dimensions you want to consider every time you analyze a new character. So when you want to establish new interaction with the character, because again, you're in the middle of the story, you are the core of the story, you're in the middle of these four main characters. So which interaction do you want from them? Just light, short-term interactions, more long-term interactions, or maybe the longest type of interaction possible? That's up to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, you may be interested by this other video on the same topic.